Let's return to the curious case of Smedley Butler. Smedley is his first name. Butler is his last name. I'm thinking that I will not make a thorough exposition of this curious case of Smedley Butler on today's program, but what I will tell you is that this Major General of the Marine Corps at the time of his retirement, this man who had committed more than 33 years of his life, a man who, at the direct intervention of the President of the United States at the time, Calvin Coolidge, took a leave from his service in the Marine Corps of 2 years to be sent into and become an administrator for the city of Philadelphia with the express objective and intent to help try to clean up the corruption that was happening in that city. And after fulfilling that term of service at the behest of the President of the United States, he returned to the Marine Corps to finish his career. And at the end of his career, I do have to read for you how he stated in his own words. Keep in mind, a career military veteran that served not just with honor but with distinction, what you would consider to be a true red, white, and blue straight shooter, a man that didn't play ball with people who were allowing greed and self-interest to drive their agendas. That's why he was moved into Philadelphia in that role, is because he didn't play ball. He did not cave in to the money, to the temptations that the dark side so often serve up to those that they wish to pervert to their pattern on their agenda. No, instead, Smedley Butler was a true red, white, and blue American patriot and hero, and yet by the time he reached the end of his career, in the course of his introspection and reflection on the geopolitical machinations that occur, not just at the scale of our national interest, but also in the world interest that it's so terribly interweaved with, I want to read for you the words that Smedley Butler used himself. This is a direct quote from Mr. Butler to describe the actual or the ultimate value, maybe you want to call it the bottom line, of what his service wound up meaning. And folks, it's hard for me to read this without becoming emotional, becoming a bit choked up and a bit teary-eyed, but your host will make every effort to do so. I begin the quote. I spent 33 years and 4 months in active military service, and during that period I spent most of my time as a high-class thug for big business, for Wall Street, and the bankers. In short, I was a racketeer, a gangster for capitalism. I helped make Mexico, and especially Tampico, safe for American oil interests in 1914. I helped make Haiti and Cuba a decent place for the National City Bank boys to collect revenues in. I helped in the raping of half a dozen Central American republics for the benefit of Wall Street. I helped purify Nicaragua for the International Banking House of Brown Brothers from 1902 to 1912. I brought light to the Dominican Republic for the American sugar interests in 1916. I helped make Honduras right for the American fruit companies in 1903. In China, in 1927, I helped see to it that Standard Oil went on its way unmolested. Looking back on it, I might have given Al Capone a few hints. The best he could do was to operate his racket in 3 districts. I operated on 3 continents. Folks, that's difficult to hear. The words directly from this decorated and this honored veteran of the Marine Corps, Major General Smedley Butler, those words that he chooses himself to pose as the introspection and reflection upon the bottom line of what his service meant. It's tragic, but it's true. And ladies and gentlemen, you'll find that to be the case most often with the real truth, that it is not pleasant to look upon. It is not pleasant to face these truths, and yet we must, if we hope to make any genuine change. We hear the word change bandied about far too recklessly in this day. If we're to make the genuine change, ladies and gentlemen, the first step is to face these horrible, awful, and ugly truths. Now, the curious case of Smedley Butler becomes far more curious and far more chilling when you reach the end of his term of military service. And it involves the allegations of what is called commonly or popularly the business plot. If you do your homework, if you make a note of the business plot and also the name of Smedley Butler, you'll have a chance to begin to research his career. But if your humble host gives you just the highlights of this business plot, I will do so as follows. In November 1934, Butler alleged the existence of a political conspiracy of banking interests to overthrow President Franklin Roosevelt, a series of allegations that came to be known in the media as the business plot. A special committee of the U.S. House of Representatives was convened, headed by Representatives John W. McCormick of Massachusetts and Samuel Dickstein of New York. This McCormick-Dickstein Special Committee was a precursor to what became a standing committee for some time in the House, which was called the Committee on Un-American Activities. In November 1934, Butler told the committee that a group of businessmen, and you might also say financiers and bankers, saying that they were backed by a private army of 500,000 ex-soldiers and other recruits, 500,000 mercenaries that had been recruited and organized by this grouping, intended to establish a fascist dictatorship in the United States of America. Butler himself had been asked to lead this army of mercenaries that would establish and enact this fascist dictatorship. In the interest of time, skipping ahead a bit in the course of this story, not only was it over 500,000 soldiers, mercenaries, that had been recruited to participate in this coup, but they were funded by a liquid $3 million that could be applied to the operational costs of this. In other words, they were already equipped, supplied, but with a liquid $3 million to use in the effort as well. I'm going to skip forward in time and in history here to the final report of the committee's findings. When the committee's final report was released, the New York Times, who had to sort of make a retraction of sorts of how they had characterized this story earlier in the process, the Times said that the committee, quote, purported to report that a 2-month investigation had convinced it that General Butler's story of a fascist march on Washington was alarmingly true, and further, also alleged that definite proof had been found that the much-publicized fascist march on Washington, which was to have been led by Major General Smedley Butler, according to testimony at the hearing, was actually contemplated. And I'm going to kind of conclude this introduction to this curious case of Smedley Butler by offering the McCormick-Dickstein Committee confirmed that some of Butler's accusations in its final report were accurate. Quoting again, quote, in the last few weeks of the committee's official life, it received evidence showing that certain persons had made an attempt to establish a fascist organization in this country. Folks, not just a fascist organization, but it was going to be utilized to attempt a coup. Continuing with the quote, there is no question that these attempts were discussed, were planned, and might have been placed in execution when and if these financial backers deemed it expedient. Well, we know from history, or at least we think we know from history, that this coup did not take place, that we are not run by a fascist regime at this time, although if we look around us and look at the headlines and understand things like how the TSA continues to grope children under 12 years of age, despite the fact that just 2 weeks ago they had said that it had become official policy that they would not, and yet just in the last few days a 6-year-old was groped not once, but groped again, sent through the cycle once again. And we know not just the TSA, but the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, under Operation Fast and Furious, moving more than 30,000 firearms across the border into Mexico, into the hands of criminals, expressly for the purpose that it would generate a backlash and perhaps give them the authority to rescind the amendment to the Constitution that provides for the keeping of firearms among the populace, and that those orders did not generate at levels of mid-level leadership within the ATF or even senior-level leadership within the ATF. It's believed those orders came directly from the Oval Office. Folks, we'd like to think history tells us that we're not in a fascist regime, but ye shall know them by the fruits of their labors. Listen not to their words, look at their actions, look at their behaviors. Coming back to Smedley Butler in 1934, We can conclude that because the coup did not take place, because this fascist organization did not, in fact, march on Washington and make a military overthrow, we can conclude then that these financial backers did, in fact, receive what it was that they were looking for. If a mugger is mugging you on the street and says, if you don't give me your wallet, I'll shoot you, if we skip the story forward 10 minutes and the person being mugged was not, in fact, shot, you can conclude that either A, they did, in fact, hand over the wallet, or B, they somehow subdued the attacker. Well, ladies and gentlemen, Smedley Butler told us himself that these attackers, these fascist organizers, were not subdued in any fashion. No. These financial interests, these global bankers, these international bankers that were behind this movement,